Jen had walked Gregnar back to her room after their long soak in the communal tub. They enjoyed every minute of it, and Gregnar actually asked how a bath could be so rejuvenating. Jen, of course, didn't understand this, but was trying to figure out what she was talking about, and Gregnar reminded her that usually walking around this much at a steady pace, her species would be very, very tired. They're more sprint type predators. They don't have a lot of staying power, which is where Jen actually laughed and reminded her that humans are pursuit predators, endurance predators, or in that nature, not really ambush. Ambush only came about because of the weapons they use. But now that she has a much more human physique, she's going to be able to deal with endurance a whole lot better, even though she might lose a little bit of her power. Gregnar was not exactly happy about losing her power, since that is how they became, well, higher up in social status in their own species. It was actually at this reason why, when she went over to her brother's room to say hi, since he had not shown up to say anything to her since her transformation, when he opened the door after saying, I'm coming, he opened the door, looked at her, looked up, she smiled. He thought for a moment who it might be, but before he spoke, he realized the ears on top of her head and simply sneered at her. He actually growled. At that point, Jen looked down and said, "That's not nice. That's your sister." With that, her brother simply said, "Is she?" and then shut the door. Not slamming it in her face, but definitely shut it a little bit faster than he had to. Gregnar was a little put back at this, but Jen consoled her, letting her know that not to worry. She still has part of her family that is willing to back her up with her decision. She decided to change into this, and for the reasons her mother and her older sister understood. Her younger siblings would figure it out eventually, and they would be able to understand why she did what she did. Even though she could never truly go back to the way she was, she would not ever be completely human. And this suited her just fine. Eventually, Gregnar back to her room, and Jen reminded her that the next day Larry would be there, first thing in the morning, she said, to come and get her to start her training. Gregnar was actually happy about this and smiled, a big old human shit-eating grin, as she was actually looking forward to it. Jen simply looked at and said, "Well, we'll see. By the end of the day, we'll see if you're still smiling." With that, Gregnar was confused, but Jen quickly excused herself as she knew that Gregnar would need her sleep. Gregnar was surprised that she wasn't nearly as tired. I know she's now an endurance predator, she thought, but how? Really? I should be so exhausted that I fall asleep on the floor, but now, instead of curling up wherever she felt like it, she wanted to sprawl out on the bed, in which she did, although she found that to be a little more difficult than before. As before, her original form did not have any extra material on the front in the chest area, but now, every time she rolled over on her stomach, she had to adjust herself constantly. She thought this was a bit annoying, but she understood why they were there. And yet, it still didn't stop it from being annoying. Even with that, she wondered if she should take off the extra undergarments. She simply called up to Jen and asked if she needed to sleep in all this clothing. Jen, of course, laughed at her and said, "Absolutely not. In this case, what you need to do is sleep in as little as possible." "Really?" Gregnar responded. "Yes, your body is going to sweat at night, and you don't want clothing holding that moisture against your skin. It's not healthy for you." "Really?" "Yes, and this is one of the many things you're going to learn about being more human. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need some sleep too." They ended the call, and of course Gregnar stripped down, went on top of her bed, and realized she actually felt more comfortable once she slid under the covers. This was odd. I thought she was supposed to sleep without anything on her, but she found that she couldn't sleep unless she actually got under the sheet that was required to be on the bed. She was confused about this, but didn't fight it as sleep slowly took her away. She seemed to have a small grin on her face, as she drifted off to dreamland. Gregnar was awoken with a start the next morning, as she could hear constant knocking on her door. It was at that point she slowly made her way up over towards the door, trying to knock sleep out of her eyes. As she did, she looked over at the clock on the side next to her own devices and was confused. 0515. What? Really? Who? She screamed out, "Who is waking me up this early? Ugh." And she made her way to the door. As she opened the door, she saw Larry standing there. "Morning." "Whoa! Okay, you want to put something on?" As Larry turned his head, trying to show his gentlemanly side, as he kind of closed his eyes a little bit and turned away. Gregnar looked at him as, "What?" She looked down as, "Oh, yeah, that again. Well, I'll be out in a moment." But she left the door open. Larry simply stood next to the doorframe and tried everything he could not to look inside, although seeing a slight bit of reflection from the small little piece of glass on the other side was making it difficult for him to keep his mind focused. But eventually, Gretnar walked out with the same clothing she had on before, and Larry simply said, "Oh, hell no. You're not wearing that frilly shit while we go work out. You mind if I come in?" With that, they walked in, and he immediately went to the bags that they went and picked up items before. With that, he pulled out other clothes and said, This is what you're wearing, along with these." He pulled out some of the shoes that were there. "Don't forget to wear socks." He pulled those out as well. With that, Gretnar looked at him weird. It's like, how do I put this on? Oh, shit. Okay, let me, okay. Well, I guess there's no way around this. Take off that outer layer. With that, Gretnar immediately took off that frilly shirt and frilly skirt that she was wearing and simply stood there in her undergarments. Larry simply told her to put her hands up, put her shirt on, told her to put one leg in each side of the shorts, and told her to tuck her shirt in. She didn't know what that meant, so he had to go around and tuck it in the first time. Then proceeded to put the socks and shoes on and tie her shoes, giving her a quick 1, 2, 3 lesson on how to tie shoes. Apparently, the shoes she had been walking in before were something you could just slip into. Larry was more than a bit annoyed at this, as he had hoped that Jen had given her a few more lessons in this, but he was ready to go. "All right, let's go," he said, as they headed towards the door. They grabbed a couple small devices, shoved them in their pockets because communication, of course, is still key, and immediately started making their way down towards the gymnasium area. As they walked into the gym, Gretnar was surprised as immediately they turned left as soon as they walked in the door. This was into the specialty areas. Now normally, most everyone stayed in the normal gymnasium area to lift any type of weight or do any type of cardio movements or even go into the simulated lakes so that they could swim. But no, over in this area, you had many, many different zones which were set up specifically for different species. As it turns out, the humans had their own gymnasium area. She was surprised when she walked in, as all of a sudden her body felt very heavy. Larry had to stop her from falling down. Said, "Yeah, sorry, I should have warned you about that. The gravity here is set to Earth's standard gravity." How much more is that?" Gretnar asked. 21% higher than your standard gravity." "But my standard gravity is 3% higher than..." "Okay. I understand now." With that, she looked around and she could see many of the humans, pretty much all of them, were in there, except for 1 or 2, of course, that had already either left or had not shown up that morning to do their exercises. Larry immediately started going through each of his different exercises, having Gretnar follow him through each one, setting the weights on each of these. He reached over into one of the lockers and pulled out a notepad, an empty notepad, and began to write down different exercises with different numbers. He told her this would be your regimen. And as they went, he showed her every single exercise she would have to do in the morning to make sure that she maintained this new body. She could figure out why as she began to see who Larry, and of course Vince, who was much wider than Larry, was beginning to put a whole bunch of weight on this bar and then laid down underneath it and then, with a few groans, simply lifted up the weights, lowered it down to their chest with a slow, deliberate movement, and then slowly lifted it back up, and then proceeded to do this 2, 3, 4, up to 10 times they did this, and then put the weight back, and then got up and simply swung their arms around. She couldn't understand it, but she would soon enough. Eventually, Larry got her on a regimen to get her started. They would have to work very carefully with the new muscles, as they were not ready yet. They were extremely atrophied, he told her. That is the reason why her arms are so dangly thin. Noodle arms, he called them. What the heck does food have to do with her arms, anyway? But she didn't argue with this. Larry was going through each of them very, very methodically, putting his hands on her shoulders or her back just to make sure she was in the right position. But every time she went out of position, he began to freak out. He would say the same thing over and over again. If you're in the wrong form, stop. She couldn't understand why until he went over and looked at several scars that he still had remaining on his body. I keep these around as a reminder, he said. This one here, I blew out my shoulder. I had to have it reconstructed. This one here, this is where they had to redo my back. These down here, you don't want replacement knees. They suck. At least the old ones did. Now they can regenerate you from the inside out, which is so much better. But I keep the scars as a reminder. You can get hurt in here really, really fast, and it doesn't feel good. So if you don't have the right form, stop. I understand, she said. With that, Vince yelled over, "He's not kidding," as he picked up several very large but smaller weights off the side rack and then began to lift them from his waist up to his shoulder, one right after the other, over and over and over again. Gregnar was amazed at this. This weight was insanely heavy. She looked over, and there was Jen doing the same exercise, but with smaller weight. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. How could these humans be so strong? Could she be that strong? She thought. She continued to go through the entire morning for the next 2.5 hours as Larry went through every single exercise methodically with her. She asked, "How do you know all this? How to say things just right?" "Well, it's real simple," he said. "I used to train people for a living. Okay, train young people like yourself. Most of them, we used to joke around and say they had an Xbox body." "What's an Xbox body?" "Oh, it was if people sat around and did absolutely nothing, they got really fat and their muscles atrophied, and it was pretty disgusting. They looked like a blob, and it was gross. And eventually, we'd have to train them up and actually get them to a point where they could at least lift their own body weight." "That bad? How long ago was this?" "Oh, right before they finally released the 0 points, and then oh man, everything changed after that. But we can talk about that later. For right now, I need you to get on this one, and you move your arms like so." He began to go into the next machine this time. It wasn't going to be free weight. The machine was there, keeping her locked into position so she didn't hurt herself and get maximum response from it. And as they moved from each one, she noticed that he would set the pin as light as possible, or if they were using any type of weight, it was the lowest there was. She asked again about this. "Well, everyone starts from 0. "Damn straight!" Vince yelled out from the other side. Looked over, and Vince was again lifting extremely large weights and making a strange noise every single time he lifted them. She started to wonder if he was in some sort of distress, and she found out very quickly that no, he would make a completely different noise if that was the case. After the 2.5 hours of their instruction, they began to head towards the door, but as she started to, Larry grabbed her by the arm and said, "Oh no, we're not done yet." Gregnar turned, and her eyes got very wide to the point where that emerald green shined in the lights. What to now? I'm tired. I'm covered in sweat. I mean, seriously, it's going to take me forever to lick this off." With that, those who heard started chuckling a little bit, just trying not to embarrass her. However, Larry was simply stone-faced. He said, "Oh no, you got the weights done. Now it's time for cardio." Cardio? They went over to a bunch of belts that were automated and they began to walk for a long time. They began to speed things up, but didn't actually raise the front as she saw others do. She was amazed at this, that others would be running at full speed while the front of this rotating belt was just raised up 45 degrees. They seemed to almost enjoy it, but their bodies were just perspiring at a level she didn't even know was possible. It wasn't until she got to the very end where Larry said, "Okay, you're going to sprint the last minute. Crank this up until you've reached your absolute limit on speed, and I want you to hold it till this timer runs out." As she did, you just heard the beep, beep, beep of them constantly turning the speed up higher and higher and higher. Some people who were staying pace with them began to raise the front of their machines up as well, just to kind of show Greknar how it's done. She began to go faster and faster and faster and faster. She started breathing more and more heavy. She could hear the thump of her own heart up in her ears. She was going. She could feel the sweat start pouring down her face, going down her back, all the way down her legs. She didn't know if she could keep it up. She kept her eyes on the timer. It was going down. 15 seconds. Oh no, I don't think I can make 15 seconds. Oh, geez, she looked over to Larry. He was concentrating as hard as he could just to make sure he didn't fall down. 10 seconds. Oh, geez. Oh, I don't know. I'm falling behind. I might fall off the back. 5 seconds. I can make it. I can make it. I can make it. I can make it. All of a sudden, the machine beeped and began to automatically slow down. She said, What's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? I don't know. What's wrong with this machine? Don't touch anything, Larry said as he waved his hand. Hands off. Just keep your hands off. Just keep walking. You're good. It took him a few seconds before he was finally able to explain the cool down procedure so that her heart didn't fully just stop. She was glad at this, and for the next 5 minutes, she slowly cooled down to the point where she could get off this rotating belt and then simply step off the back. After that, and a few light stretches, they headed towards the door. "So, same time tomorrow, huh?" Greknar looked up with a little bit of confusion, but then she realized that Larry was talking to Vince. "Yep, I'll see you tomorrow." And with that, they saw Vince just take off at full speed out the door. Immediately tell when he passed the gravity field because he immediately picked up speed. Speed she didn't even realize was possible. She thought to herself, no wonder humans can be so fast. And we kept this going. We kept that walk going for almost an hour. With that, they walked themselves back, and Larry made sure that Greknar made it back to her room so she could clean up before classes. Greknar was still slick with sweat as they finally made it back. She simply stopped and turned to Larry before she went in. "So is there anything special I need to know about cleaning up?" You've been shown how to take a shower, right?" "Yes." "Well, there you go. Just make sure you're wearing undergarments, especially if you're wearing a skirt." "Why?" "Just trust me, please." With that, Greknar actually lifted her hand up, put it on his chest, and said, "I will always trust you," and then turned to walk away. She didn't realize how flushed Larry was, but she could actually sort of kind of smell a different scent coming from him at that moment. But at that time, all she could truly smell was her own sweat. She wanted to get all the stink off of her, so she immediately went into the shower, cranking on the power and turning the water on. She immediately jumped in, not even caring that she was still wearing clothing, although she realized it very quickly as she tried to use something they call soap to actually cleanse herself. She realized that she needed to be completely undressed for this, but she looked forward to the sensation, which she enjoyed very much, being completely cleansed. Later on in class, everything was normal, yet after class was different. Larry would immediately go straight to Greknar as they had their class together and said, "Okay, time for your training." "What? I thought we trained this morning," she asked. "Oh no, that was just physical training. Now that you're done with class, we have other training to do. What kind of training? You want to be an ambush predator, right? Like us? Yes. Well, good. It's time for you to learn. And eventually, you'll become very, very sneaky, just like us. Gregnar kind of grinned at this, the cute little grin, as her ears kind of fluttered a little bit at the idea. Her tail swayed back and forth, and this did not go unnoticed, as she could hear Jen and a couple other of the human females giggle at the idea. Within 20 minutes, they were actually inside Larry's room. He had already queued up a whole bunch of videos from an old human that was apparently still on Earth, but had had to regenerate himself as he was much older than Larry was. And now he continued to do videos on survival. Yet Gregnar was surprised. She knew how to survive in the forest. But Larry had to remind her, no, you know how to survive as a force. Now you have to learn how to survive as a human. Those are two very different things. You may still have claws, he said as he picked up his hands, but these are not exactly the, well, bear paws that you had before. She was confused. Bear paws? These dainty digits that you have, Larry continued, these are... You're not going to slice through a Vunshin or a Zegneckel with these. You're going to piss it off and you're going to hurt them, but I guarantee if you tried to sink your claws in there and hold on, you risk ripping these little phalanges out, okay? You need to actually learn how to be a little bit more human. You don't have your old forced body anymore, at least not all of it. Gregnar was a little bit put back at the idea of this, but she understood what he was talking about. And eventually they sat down and watched this one they called the Survivor Man. Well, she didn't understand. Shouldn't she learn something from a Survivor Woman? But she didn't fight it too much. She did watch all these old videos as she looked at the topography of the human's own planet. She was surprised. Every time a different one of these episodes began, she would see a different type of topography. She was amazed. Her own planet was mostly just a wide open savanna with mixed jungles in it. But aside from that, it was pretty much the same all the way around with the exception of the poles. And no one ever went to the poles unless they had protective gear. It was just too damn cold. Yet she looked over at the humans where had to deal with mountains, with tundras, with deserts, with forests, with jungles, with all sorts of different things. And she was absolutely astounded. And one of the things that actually blew her mind was when they started showing the different animals in these areas. She insisted on pausing one of the videos and looking, and it looked like there was a bunch of strange looking forest off in the savannah. All of them kind of looking at whoever was filming them. She stopped and asked Larry, what the hell is... You have forest on your planet? No, we don't, he said. Those... hold on a second. He pulled open a different window just to show them the difference of the species of feline they had. Everything from house cats to lynx to cougars to actual lions and tigers. Oh my, it was an eye-opener for Gregnar. She all of a sudden realized why so many of them called her the giant kitty. Here, kitty, kitty. And she realized that that was more of a joke, not really an insult, as she had really taken it before. In one case, she had actually backhanded one of the first humans that she ever met because of this, as she thought it was an insult. The human thought that it might be taken the wrong way, so he simply shut up and walked away. Now she was confused at how do humans intermate with these? Larry's like, no, never. No, hell no. What, are you kidding me? Gregnar was a little put off at this, but continued to move on as she wanted to get away from that subject. A little bit distraught, she continued with the lesson. The lessons continued every single day. There was no days off, and Larry was quick to say that. Even when it came to physical training, there was no days off. There were light days, there were heavy days, but there was no days off. With that, he insisted on following her down into the cafeteria and making sure that she ate what she needed to continually grow herself physically. With that, Jen was also there and insisted that she try certain things during dinner. Larry was not happy about this, but he knew how much Greknar was going to enjoy a big old piece of New York cheesecake. He wasn't wrong. She almost purred again as she made the sound as the cream went over her tongue, and she was just absolutely astounded at this. She almost tried to bite through the fork as she didn't want the flavor to go away from her tongue. She then proceeded to chow down 3 different slices of cheesecake, and Larry told her, "Don't have any more, you're not going to feel good after that." Greknar responded, "I don't care." Though about an hour and a half later, she cared a lot, as Larry, Jenny, and Vince all had to carry her back to her room and overwatch her because she was extremely sick. She did not feel good at all, and they had to tell her, "This is what happens when you overindulge. Just be glad we weren't drinking." Drinking what? Ethyl alcohol. With that, Greknar's eyes got huge. "Why would you want to poison me?" Ethyl alcohol isn't as toxic to humans as it is to a force. "But I'm still partially forced." "Yeah, that's why we didn't take you out drinking. Normally, to celebrate, we go out and all get plastered off our ass, but the last thing we need to do is put you into a coma or worse on your first day." She looked over confused, very confused at the whole idea. The fact that she looked around at the 3 of them and realized that they actually cared so much about her that they would actually take away one of their indulgences just to be around her. She thanked them for this and thanked them for watching over her right before she ran to her bathroom and tasted the cheesecake over again, followed quickly by the very large steak she had for dinner. They did not go together well, and she vomited again, this time more violently. It would be the first time she ever had to deal with the dry heaves, and she did not enjoy it. Both Larry and Vince laughed a little bit and said, "Yeah, that's part of being human." "I don't like this part," Greknar said as she had her head inside the toilet. Jenny was there trying to hold her hair back, but unfortunately some of it had already fallen in. And with that, she closed the bathroom door and took Greknar directly into the shower to hose her off. A cold shower helped a lot, although Greknar did fight her on it a bit. With that, training continued the next day and the next day. It was always physical training in the morning. Then she went to her classes, which was the only easy part of the day. Many of her muscles were very stiff between classes, and she had to constantly stretch out. Thankfully for her, Larry was always there to make sure she did the stretches correctly so she didn't hurt herself. This she appreciated very, very much. So much so that she began to actually reach over and use Larry as a brace, but not that she needed a brace. She began to rub her hands against his body. She knew that his body was fit because he spent a lot of time inside the workout area. He was what was affectionately referred to as a gym rat, although he had no rat DNA, so she didn't understand the whole rodent thing. After classes, Larry would be there and immediately take her for any type of training. It wasn't just videos, no. She had to learn all sorts of different things. She learned how to put on all the camouflage correctly. She started to understand how they were able to take the scent away or cover it up in some way, shape, or form. She got introduced to how to hold the rifle and was constantly told, "Squeeze, don't pull." She didn't quite understand this until they finally went to the range. He made sure she had eye protection and ear protection for this because these were going to be live bullets and not the paint rounds they're used to. She did not enjoy the idea of having some sort of massive cover across her head so that they could make sure that she didn't go deaf from those ears that stuck out on top. However, she did appreciate it once she heard the first shot go off. She realized that these weapons were very loud, but once she got used to that, she realized that with a bit of patience, she could finally reach out and name her shots right on target from a long distance away. But that wouldn't be anywhere near the end of her training, even though she thought that was going to be it. No, no, no. She had to learn how to move in a way that couldn't be seen. You see, forced, when they stalk their prey, actually stalk their prey. They don't know how to hold still for very long. They're constantly moving either their ears around or their eyes or something. They're constantly moving around, looking slowly for any type of movement, any type of change in the color scheme, anything. And it took a long time for Greknar to actually learn how to be patient and how to be quiet. She used her advanced hearing to be extremely quiet. To make the point, Larry said he would go out first and try to sneak up on her. He'd be watching to see where she would set up, and then he would try to come up and tap her on the top of the head. She would have to learn how to spot him. As she got into her position, she looked around. She used her slightly enhanced sense of smell to sniff the air. She knew he was close as he didn't put any scent blocker on, so he was very close. She couldn't zero in on him like she used to be able to, but again, she didn't have the stretched out nasal cavities as her forefathers had. She now had a very stumped nasal passage, which limited her ability to smell, but it was still well above that of humans. Then she listened. She listened very close. She could hear movement, but she didn't know what the movement was. Was that the wind? Was that some sort of local fauna that might be about? Was that simply some avian species moving about? She listened very closely, and as she did, she heard something scrape. Something that didn't seem quite right. Something scraped again. Something very slowly was trying to move. It only took a few more seconds for her to realize what was going on. Something was being dragged across the ground. Something was getting closer and closer to her, but she wasn't sure where. She began to move her hood off of her ears and began to move her ears around a little bit left and right, trying to zero in on what it was. But as she did, the scraping stopped. And she listened again. This time, she wouldn't cover her ears again. She simply waited. And just as the scraping continued just a little bit, she all of a sudden realized something. She jumped up, turned to her left, looked around left and right. Where was it? And then ran over for a few steps and then tripped and fell. With that, Larry got up and said, "Ow, you kicked me in the face." She got up and Greknar immediately apologized. "I'm sorry for that. Sorry. He goes, No, as he wiped the blood off his lip. "No, good job. You actually heard me coming." "Well, of course. How could I miss that?" "Your mother did. And you missed the first time, remember?" She reached down to her backside and go, "How could I forget?" With that, they both shared a quick chuckle. Larry once again knocked the blood off of his lip, realizing that, he might need to spend some time in front of the dual torsion just to make sure that seals up pretty good. And with that, they continued their training. Eventually, it came down to a final test. This time, Greknar would be taken all the way out into the tundra areas of the planet. This is where the game would be. The game that would be hunted this season. They set up their camp out there with a strange little device she found out would be a wood stove. She was surprised at this because normally they just simply wrap themselves up in sleeping bags, but now that there is snow everywhere, they would need some sort of heat source to keep themselves warm at night. Although Gregnar thought maybe there was a different way they could stay warm. In her culture, it was normal, if they were cold, for everyone to just curl up together. Larry laughed at this and said, "Yeah, that's what sheep do." "What's a sheep?" Gregnar asked. "It's just an herbivore species from my planet. Don't worry about it." But, yeah, I, in that case, I wouldn't trust myself. Gregnar, "What do you mean not trust yourself?" Larry sighed. You know what? Never mind. We got the stove. We should be good. I brought some cots, so we're good to rock and roll here. With that, they simply cooked their meal on the stove and enjoyed their time together, joking a little bit and playing a small game as the sun went down. Using a small light, they continued their game deep into the night, and then Gregnar simply stated how tired she was and curled up inside her sleeping bag. But this time, the sleeping bag was much, much larger. Larry reached over and made sure it was zipped up tight and told her that if she ever got too cold to let him know. And then he went over to the other side and simply climbed into his own sleeping bag, which he nicknamed his fart sack, and dozed off as well. Gregnar had a little bit of trouble falling asleep, but she was looking over as the light from the fire was flickering. She could just barely see Larry's face. She began to feel warm, but not from the fire or the sleeping bag. She kept wondering what this was, and whenever she asked Jenny why she suddenly felt a flush of heat, Jenny would simply laugh, that strange little chuckle, and she never did get a straight answer. Although, given all the extra assistance she was given and the extra things she had seen right before she had done her transformation, well, she had a rough idea of what was going on. She just didn't know what she should do. She wouldn't worry about it too much, though. The next morning, they were on top of a hill. The only one with a long gun was Gregnar. She moved up, and she had that strange white garment on that was blotched with pieces of black on it. She found out that this was a type of camouflage very similar to what she had been training with before, and she looked over, and there was Larry with a set of what he calls binoculars. As he looked over the area, he suddenly said, "Right there. They're leaving the wood line." Gregnar pulled up her rifle and looked through the scope itself. She could see there was a strange type of six-legged herbivore. She recognized this. It was considered a bit of a delicacy, but they had to be hunted. They were never raised, for reasons she had no idea. Immediately, Larry started talking her through everything, and Gregnar did everything that he said. "All right, sight in around the heart. You're looking at 400 meters. Gregnar immediately adjusted herself. "No wind. Safety off. Finger on the trigger. Breathe in. Finger on the trigger. Slowly breathe out and squeeze very slowly." Bang! With that, they could see that the animal flinched and immediately dropped. "You got him," Larry said, as he immediately got up. As he went to step forward, he could see that Gregnar still had the rifle pointing forward. "Whoa, clear that thing," he said. Gregnar immediately did what she was supposed to. She reached up on the side, pulled the bolt up and back, releasing the spent brass as it flew over and sizzled as it hit inside the snow and melted all the way down into the ice. She wanted to go retrieve it, but she didn't have a chance. As Larry said, let's go. Let's get our prize here." With that, they moved their way down. Gregnar immediately slung the weapon across her shoulder, and Larry led the way down the hill until they got to the herbivore that they had shot. It was pretty large, dressed out, you're looking at about 500 or 600 pounds. Larry turned and said, "Good shot," and then immediately pulled out a knife and went to work. The whole process of cleaning it was something that Gretnar was not used to, of course, but she appreciated the fact that with great care, he was not wasting anything. Opening up several different pouches on their packs, they began to put all the meat they could in it, and then pulling out the foldable pulk, and then placing the meat on top. With that, they didn't even leave the hide behind, as the hide would be sold. Yet, all the meat and most of the organs were going to be their chow. They got back to their camp and were eating extremely well that night. And when they finished, they were sitting there just enjoying the fire, and Gretnar finally had enough of this, as she had been spending the past several months training with Larry, making sure that she was doing everything right to be better, to make sure that she could become an ambush predator, and show her father that the transformation was a smart idea. Show that this was not just a fluke, that this would show that they could be even better if they learned the way humans were, that maybe, just maybe, they could show everyone that they were, in fact, the apex predator around the universe. This is what she wanted, at least at first. She looked over, and Larry had been sitting there without a shirt, as the inside of the tent itself was exceedingly hot. The fire itself was burning so much that it was just warming up the tent to over 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It was so much so that Gretnar herself started stripping layers off, and she was down to only one layer. Well, layer and a half. As she looked over, she could see that Larry was just relaxing after enjoying that good meal. She asked Larry to exit the tent for a little bit while she got something out of her bag, but it was going to be a surprise. Larry was a little put back at this and really didn't want to move after eating so much, but he proceeded to put on his heavy coat, no t-shirt, along with a hat and some gloves, slipped on his boots, and went outside. The brush of cold air was enough for Gretnar to suddenly want to get closer to the fire, but she knew that would be a bad idea. As soon as the front was zipped up, she immediately started to change. She reached into her bag and got the small bit of clothing that one of the humans had told her to bring. She immediately started to put it on, and then once she was finished, she called for Larry to come back inside. Larry said, "You sure? You decent?" "Sure, yes, I am," she said. "Come on in." She heard the zip of the zipper, and Larry came in, but he had his head down to try and limit the amount of cold air that was going in. He turned around, put the zipper back down, made sure it was sealed, and just as he flipped his hood back up and looked, he saw Gretnar standing there in a strange, petite little maid's outfit. She was standing there on one leg, with the other leg cranked up, her arms lifted up towards her face, with her palms facing down in almost little fists, in a strange, odd pose, and she went, "Meow?" "What the fuck are you doing?" Larry said. "Well, isn't this your mating dance? This is what Lee told me that you humans are into when it comes to anything feline." "Oh, jeez," Larry said. "I'm going to kick Lee's ass the next time I see him." What is wrong?" Gretnar said. I don't understand. Please explain this to me, because you humans are strange. You don't have a mating season. It's not that simple. You don't have alphas. You don't even sit there and have a pride. I don't get it. Just, what the... It's okay. Larry went over and immediately put his hands on her shoulder. Come here. Relax. As he pulled her in for a hug. "Listen, I want you to understand that humans are different. Every single one of us is a bit different, and we have to deal with some psychological issues too." I don't understand," Gretnar said. Well, let me get this coat off and I'll explain, because it's really hot in here." He immediately started to strip off his boots, his coat, toss his gloves and hat near the fire, but not on it, to make sure they dried. He had Gretnar sit on her cot as he got in close, put his hands together with hers and rest them on her knees, and looked into those bright green eyes and tried to explain. Look, you have to understand, I am almost 90 years old. Okay, I may look young, but I'm not young. When I first saw you, I started training you, I started thinking of my nieces, okay? It's what's a niece? Oh shit. Larry was a little off. He forgot that Force don't exactly have names for things like this. The closest thing they could come to through any type of translator was cousin, but that didn't even work either, because intermixing with your own brothers and sisters was not exactly unheard of. Hell, intermixing with your own parents was not unheard of. It was just the way their biochemistry was designed. So he simply had to break it down. Look, I started looking at you like one of my own kin, and for humans, that's you don't mate with your own kin, okay? Our biochemistry won't mix like that, and it's not right. I don't understand. Don't you find this attractive? She pulled one of her hands out and motioned to herself. Oh no, I find it exceedingly attractive. But the issue is, well, there's a couple issues. Which are? She asked. Larry continued with, well, first things first, you understand how old I am. Yes? And you, by human standards, you're how old? 18? Yeah. Okay. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some humans, they would be on you like a Zeknekel on an insectoid. Okay, they would be all over you because you're beautiful, you're young, you're fertile, you're a very feminine young lady, and you're very friendly to me, at least. I mean, I've seen you kick a few guys' asses before, but I mean, look, I I have to get past the psychological boundaries when humans are at least real men, real human men, not human males, but real human men, get to a certain age. We look at a young girl like you and we think we're just being this dirty old man. We try to joke about it to try and lighten the burden of it all. But in our culture, it's not really right for an old man to go after such a young woman. At least it hasn't been that way in a long, long time. Is that all? You really think I care about the age difference? She said, she getting more and more pissed off, so much so that her ears had actually canted down and back, a show of frustration. I don't care about any of that. I have feelings for you, okay? I have these strange flashes of heat and everything. I understand, Larry said, but there's another issue here. A bigger one. At least for me, as a real man, this is hard for me to get past. Okay? And what is it? She asked. Larry kind of lowered his head and then looked back into her eyes as her ears began to perk up, seeing that this was difficult for him to say. You've never had a mate. So? She said. For Forrest, that's not a big deal, okay? You'll hit your mating season. It's not a big deal at all. But for us, that's a very big deal. Your value as a protective mate for everyone around you does have a lot to do with your purity level. Purity level? It used to be known as a body count. You don't want to have a lot of men mating with you. Okay, call it a jealousy thing if you want, but a woman who goes around and mates with a whole bunch of different men is not looked highly on in human society. Well, what about Jen? She's had several mates. I don't need to know about any of that shit, Larry said, dismissively as he waved his hand, trying desperately to get Gretnar to say anything else, any other subject. He understood that Jenny likes to be promiscuous when it comes to the other species. Main reason? He already knew that humans cannot be impregnated by any other species. They've checked. don't worry about Jen. I'm worried about you, okay? I care about you too. I I have feelings for you as well. I mean, I can't train with you this much and have you all over me like you do without getting some sort of desire. But I don't want to hurt you. You, how would you hurt me? I mean, I know the pinch is going to be there. The pinch? What the fuck is the pinch? I'm not going to pinch you. I'm not going to harm you. Why would you think I'm going to sit here and pinch you? Greknar rolled her eyes and actually fluttered her eyes, a sign of complete and total confusion and almost an eye roll for any other young girl. Well, the pinch is, well, when we mate, it is required that we feel pain. That pain allows us to release our ovum down into ourselves so that we can be pregnant. The pinch is not welcome. We don't really enjoy it. But during our mating cycle, we'll mate with a whole bunch of males that will cause this pinch. And it's set up as kind of a joke for us. We kid about it. Again, similar to humans, we try to make fun of it. But it's there. And it's enough that it makes us not want to mate sometimes because it gets too much. Some females enjoy it. Some of them greatly enjoy it. In fact, they like being smacked around by their alphas. They love being struck, and for that, they enjoy the pinch all the time. But only because I see you as a good mate could I endure the pinch from you. With that, she noticed that Larry had a small grin on his face, and he was desperately trying not to laugh. You actually think that every time you in this body, and he motions towards her, in this body, you would feel pain from me every single time. You would think that every time that you, as now a human female, well, as human as you can be, mating with another human, we're going to deliberately make you hurt. Well, yes, that's the way our species is, she said. Totally confused why he was so just absolutely chuckling out loud and trying not to hysterically belly laugh. Let me, hold on. let me get 1 sec. Holding his finger up so she would not talk over him. That doesn't happen with humans. What? No, that doesn't happen. Hasn't Jen explained any of this to you? Not really. I asked her if it would hurt, and she simply said, yeah. Oh, shit. That's another ass I'm going to have to kick when I get back. Larry was clearly frustrated at this. No, only once. Only once, okay? Unless there's something physically wrong with you and they can fix that. The docs can do amazing things. But this is why Jenny has no problem going around and doing all that shit. I mean, you think she's bad? Holy crap, you should see Jezebel, the way she goes about. That other human female? Yeah, she doesn't seem to like me. She doesn't seem to like any other women. She likes the guys, though, a little too much. Jezebel, I didn't understand why such a long name for a human. Most of your names are very short. That's a cultural thing. I'm not going to get into it, he says. And with that, he stood up, still holding her hand. Now, just understand, right now, it's not the right time. We need to sit down and, for the love of God, you need to sit and talk to a couple human females. Tell you what, I'll get you lined up with the doc, and she'll explain this as clinically as you need to. And I just hope she can get all the information out to you. Do you mind if my sister joins me? I don't mind. Just talk to the doc on that. With that, they realized that the inside of the tent was starting to get a little chilly as the fire had started to die down. With that, they decided that they needed to just get some sleep. It was going to be a long hike the next day once they packed everything up and dragged everything via the two pokes back to their lifting area. Then the VTOL would come and pick them up. It was only going to be about a mile and a half, but still, dragging all this weight was going to be difficult. Larry was the one to simply suggest, how about we sleep on this? I thought you didn't want to sleep together. Just, no, sorry, human phrase. Let's get some sleep. We'll deal with this with a fresh mind and fresh eyes and a fresh perspective. Okay, but I really don't want to sleep in this. Larry looked down as she motioned and started to pull at that stupid maid's uniform she was wearing. No, I wouldn't think you would. With that, they both got ready to go to sleep, and Larry got a good surprise as he looked over as Greknar had stripped off the entire thing and was actually facing away as she pulled her tail towards her to get that bow off the tip. He looked at her form and immediately got flushed and looked away. What he didn't know is Greknar had noticed, and she giggled. When they finally got back, one of the first things they did after cleaning themselves up was go immediately to the human doctor. Dr. Lin had been looking forward to actually speaking with Greknar to see how everything had changed. They were back in the embassy, of course, and the doc began to talk to her. But as they started getting on more interesting issues, Larry very quickly excused himself. And as he did, he ran into Greknar's sister and simply said, she's in here, and then he opened the door for her. She still looked at him with a little bit of vitriol, but she simply walked in, and Larry closed the door. Larry waited outside in the waiting room long enough to have 3 different cups of coffee and also run most of his devices out of power. And yet, every so often, he could hear Greknar's sister go, "Are you freaking kidding me?" And he wondered what they were talking about. He worried that they were getting the wrong information, but then again, this was the best doctor that had been sent, so he assumed they were getting all the information. Every once in a while, he would also hear Greknar's voice, "What? No way! Are you kidding me?" was all that kept coming out of there. And yet, as soon as they finally exited the office, the doc led the way, and he could see Greknar and her sister both had wide eyes, and as Greknar looked over at him, she smirked. Oddly enough, the doc had the same stupid grin on her face, but Greknar's sister looked Larry up and down and seemed to sneer just a little bit. And then, as she passed, she simply stated again, "Are you kidding me?" and simply walked past and walked out. Larry simply looked and said, "Come on, we're late for class."